hadn't seen that shade of rust in years. It bled down the mailbox, flaked off the metal railing, and dusted the gravel path that led to the front door of the Lakehouse, my father's Lakehouse, or what was left of it. The key came in the mail 3 weeks after the funeral. No note, no legal letter. Just a plain manila envelope and a single brass key with a faded green tag. The handwriting said, "For Evelyn," not for resale. It was strange. My father had barely spoken to me the last 10 years of his life. After he walked out on my mother and me when I was 10, he'd become more myth than man. I only knew what my mother told me, that he left us for some woman with a boat, that he never paid a cent in child support, and that he'd never come back unless he needed something. She said it so often I stopped questioning it. I stepped out of the rental car and took in the scene. A dock stretched into the quiet lake water, lapping gently at the wood as if trying to soothe the rot. The siding of the house had pulled away in places. A shutter hung loose by a single hinge. The place looked abandoned, unloved, kind of like how he left me. But then again, he had left me this, and something about that confused me. I stood there for a while, key clenched in my palm, unsure if I was supposed to feel angry, nostalgic, or grateful. All I knew was that something pulled me here. Maybe I wanted closure. Maybe I just needed to understand what kind of man leaves a child, then 28 years later sends her a key in the mail. When I pushed open the door, it creaked like it hadn't seen sunlight in a decade. The air was stale, dry pine needles and old coffee grounds, but something felt untouched, preserved. The living room was modest, 2 dusty armchairs, a stone fireplace, and above it, a photo that stopped me cold. It was me at 10, holding a fishing rod laughing. My father beside me, smiling in that sheepish, shy way I used to think was charming, before I learned how quickly he could disappear. That photo wasn't on display in my mother's house. She'd torn up most of the pictures after the divorce, said they were a waste of frame space. But here in this house, he never told me about he'd kept a picture of us, scented, framed, untouched by time or dust. I looked around again, more photos. A few of me in middle school, even a printout of my college graduation announcement. Taped, not framed, but still. He'd followed my life, quietly, secretly, and suddenly I realized I'd been living inside a version of him that wasn't entirely true. A lie, maybe. Or maybe just a single side of a truth no one ever cared to unfold. In the corner of the living room, something caught my eye, a wooden chest locked. Not with a padlock, but with a small brass keyhole. I reached into my coat pocket, heart thudding harder than I expected. The key slid in like it belonged. Inside, on top of a stack of yellowing envelopes, lay a letter. My name on the front, written in the same jagged scrawl as the green tag on the key. Evelyn. If you're reading this, then I'm dead. Don't let anyone take this house until you figure out why I gave it to you. Not Tessa, not your mother, not even yourself until you know. Start with the basement. Trust what you feel. Dad. My hands shook. I hadn't called anyone Dad in years, not even out loud. And now here he was writing to me from beyond the grave, asking me to trust a man I'd never truly known. Tessa. Of course he mentioned her. My half-sister. Younger by 9 years. The child my mother said was my second chance at family, a chance that never stopped taking. Rent money, bail money, emergency medical bills, emotional hostage notes hidden behind tearful phone calls. I was the responsible one. She was the free spirit. If he left this house to me, not her, that would not go over well. The wind outside picked up rustling, brittle leaves across the dock. I sat down hard on the dusty armchair and let my fingers trace the edges of the letter again. My mother always said he was a coward. But cowards don't write letters like this, and cowards don't hide something in the basement. I stood up slowly, the wooden floor groaning beneath my boots. One thing was suddenly sharply clear. This wasn't just a house. This was a message. And whatever truth my father had buried here, I was going to find it, even if it broke everything I thought I knew about the people I loved. The stairs to the basement were stiff with age and silence. Every step I took creaked like a whisper from the past, warning or welcoming, I wasn't sure. The wooden railing felt rough under my hand, and for the briefest moment I thought about turning around. But I couldn't. He'd told me to go here, not to trust anyone else. And deep down in some small defiant corner of my heart, I wanted to believe he had meant it, that it wasn't just another cruel joke. The basement was colder than the rest of the house, but dry. A bare bulb dangled from the ceiling, its light yellow and hesitant. I pulled the cord. The room flickered into view. Against the far wall was a filing cabinet. Beside it, a workbench, cluttered with tools, scraps of wire, old paint cans, and what looked like hand-drawn diagrams. I walked past a pile of fishing gear to the filing cabinet and opened the top drawer. It groaned. Inside were folders, lots of them, labeled by year. Some had my name scribbled on the tab. Others had names I didn't recognize. I pulled one out, Evelyn, 2003, my high school sophomore year. Inside, a copy of my class schedule, printed emails about a scholarship I'd applied for, even a blurry photo of me at a science fair. I flipped through the pages with shaking hands. He had been watching me, following me, tracking me from afar, not in a creepy way, but like someone who didn't know how to say, "I'm proud of you," out loud. The next folder was even stranger: estate planning, Evelyn versus Tessa. I opened it. Inside were notes, typed and handwritten, a draft will with my name as sole beneficiary, another version months later listing Tessa instead, and then one last version dated 6 months ago, my name again. Beneath it was a note in my father's handwriting. "She doesn't understand yet, but she will." I stared at the page for a long time. Why the changes? Why the back and forth? What had made him doubt me, and then choose me again? As I dug deeper into the cabinet, I found what I didn't expect: a safe. It was tucked behind a false wall panel, small, digital keypad, and taped to the top another note. "You won't open this today. Not because you can't, but because you're not ready. You'll know when, Dad." Something about the note didn't feel dramatic or manipulative. It felt honest, like he really had meant this house as more than inheritance, as a key, a test, a turning point. I sat on the workbench stool and looked around the basement. Dust motes hung in the air like suspended time. Everything he left behind told me one thing: he hadn't abandoned me entirely. He'd just watched from the shadows, convinced that staying away was better than getting it wrong again. Was it cowardice? Maybe. But cowardice and love aren't always separate. Upstairs, I made tea on the dusty stovetop and sat at the small kitchen table. I hadn't called my mother in days. Not since the funeral, really. Her voice still echoed in my head, full of venomous relief. Good riddance. He was never worth your time, Evelyn. I never thought to ask why she hated him so deeply. I just accepted it, like children do. And Tessa, she texted me earlier that morning. "Hey, just checking in. Has probate said anything? I mean, if there's property, it should be shared. Right, let me know what's fair." Fair. That word felt poison now. I closed my eyes and let the silence wrap around me like a heavy coat. This house was filled with ghosts, and not just of my father. It carried the weight of who I used to be: obedient, dutiful, guilty. What did it say about me that I kept giving and giving to people who always wanted more? What did it say that I called it love? I remembered the letter. "Don't even trust yourself until you know." Know what had he seen in me that I hadn't yet seen in myself? That night, I didn't sleep upstairs in the dusty guest bed. I stayed in the living room, curled up under an old quilt that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme. The fireplace remained cold. The photo of us, me and him, on the wall, watched silently. I wondered if he knew what he was doing when he left me this place. If he'd sensed how much I needed it, not just as closure, but as a confrontation. A mirror. At 2:14 a.m., my phone buzzed. Tessa again. "Mom's worried. She said you're being weird. Can we just talk about what's in the will? We're family, right?" I didn't answer. I stared at the screen until it dimmed and went black. Then I whispered out loud to no one but the shadows, "Are we?" And from deep within that silence, something in me shifted. I wasn't sure what it was yet, but it was the first time in years I didn't feel afraid of the answer. The next morning, I drove back into town. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed to breathe somewhere that didn't smell like secrets. I hadn't told anyone I was staying at the Lakehouse. I hadn't even mentioned the key. My mother believed the house was sold off years ago in a messy asset liquidation she claimed my father was too lazy to fight. But clearly, that was another lie. One of many I was beginning to realize. I parked outside the diner where Mom had worked on and off for most of her life. It was one of those small-town places where everyone knew your face, but not your whole story, only the versions you told. She was behind the counter refilling a customer's coffee. Her hair was grayer than I remembered, pinned back like she used to do in the 90s. Her face lit up when she saw me, though, not with warmth. "Well, look who came crawling home," she said, with a half-smile that never quite reached her eyes. "You finished sorting out your deadbeat daddy's junk yet? I should have known better than to expect tenderness." She used sarcasm the way other people used hugs. "Can we talk?" I asked quietly. She raised a brow. "Depends. Are you here to start a fight or to finally listen to reason?" "Neither." "Then grab a booth. I get a break in 5. I sat down by the window, the one with the tiny cactus in the chipped terracotta pot. She joined me moments later, sliding into the booth like it was just another Tuesday. She didn't ask about the funeral or the Lakehouse. She just looked at me and waited. "I found some things in the house," I said carefully. "Photos, letters, notes he wrote to me." She scoffed. "He always did love a dramatic exit. He was following my life, Mom, quietly, but he was paying attention." Her eyes narrowed. "What do you want me to say, Evelyn? That he was a secret saint?" "He wasn't. He left. You remember that, right? The night he walked out with his suitcase and didn't even say goodbye." I did remember, or at least I remembered how she told me it happened. "I don't think he stopped caring," I said more to myself than to her. "Oh, honey," she said with a condescending smile, patting my hand like I was 5 again. "He stopped the second he found a younger woman who didn't mind living on a boat." I pulled my hand back. "He left the house to me, Mom. Not to Tessa, not to you." Her mouth tightened. "What house? That shack, that thing's worthless. That shack has a safe in the basement. He left instructions. For me. He wanted me to figure something out." She leaned back, folding her arms. "Figures. He always loved riddles. Too bad he didn't care much for child support or being a father." I watched her carefully. Something in her tone didn't match her words. She was angry, yes, but there was something else. A flicker of fear. "You told me he vanished," I said. "You never mentioned he tried to see me. You never told me he wrote letters." She waved a hand dismissively. "What letters? Junk mail. Postcards from nowhere. He didn't send money. That's what mattered. But it wasn't your choice to hide them from me. It was my job to protect you." "No," I said. "It was your job to give me the truth and let me decide what to do with it." Her jaw clenched. "Don't stand there and judge me, Evelyn. Everything you had, school, that fancy degree, your first apartment, I helped make it happen. Me. Not him. I was the one cleaning motel rooms and skipping meals so you could have brand-name notebooks." I felt my throat tighten. This was the part where she always made me feel small. Guilty. Like everything I'd earned had come at her expense. "I know you sacrificed a lot," I said gently. "But that doesn't mean you get to control my memories or rewrite the story." She stood abruptly. "You're just like him. Always thinking feelings count more than facts. You want to worship a man who left you because it's easier than admitting I was right. I'm not worshipping him. I'm trying to understand what actually happened, because I've lived my whole life thinking he abandoned me, and now I'm not so sure." She said nothing, just grabbed her apron and walked back behind the counter, leaving me there with a heart pounding like a drum against my ribs. On the drive back to the Lakehouse, Tessa called. I let it go to voicemail. She texted 3 minutes later. "I heard Mom's upset. Please don't do anything dramatic. Just tell me what he left." "We're sisters, Ev. We share things. Always have." I stared at the text for a long time. Tessa was always like that, soft when she needed something, sharp when she didn't get it. It was true I'd shared everything with her. Money, time, support, bailouts, endless emotional labor. But maybe that was the problem. Maybe I'd been sharing so much of myself with people who never stopped to ask what I needed in return. When I pulled into the gravel driveway again, the sun was setting. The lake was glassy. Still, I stood outside the house for a long time, listening to the wind sift through the trees. Inside, the silence felt deeper. I went back down to the basement. I looked at the safe. I touched the note again. "You'll know when." And for the first time since I opened that front door, I felt it. A line was being drawn. Between the person I was raised to be and the woman I was becoming. I couldn't sleep that night. The Lakehouse was too quiet. The kind of quiet that seeps into your bones and makes you feel like the walls are listening. I kept seeing my mother's face in the diner, hearing her voice as she spat venom in the shape of concern. I'd grown so used to those tones that part of me thought they were normal, expected, even earned. But the safe downstairs and the files in that cabinet told a different story. A quieter one, a patient one. A version of my father I hadn't been allowed to know. It was almost 2 a.m. when I went back into the basement. I sat cross-legged on the floor, surrounded by folders, photographs, and dust. I pulled out a new file from the bottom drawer labeled EL, Private, Do Not Forward. My initials. Inside was an envelope thicker than the others, heavier. And the handwriting was messier, more urgent. This time it wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to Margot Hale, my mother. I hesitated, then opened it. Margot, I don't know what kind of story you'll tell her about me, but I want you to know something I never stopped trying. I made mistakes plenty. I was scared. You and I both know how easy it was to break things back then. But I never stopped loving her. I wrote, I called. You ignored me. You returned letters unopened. You said she didn't need a man who abandoned her, but you never told her I asked to see her. You kept her. And I let you. That's on me. But if you're reading this now and she's found the key, then you've already lost. Because truth finds its way eventually. I hope you make peace with what you did. I left her the house because it's the only thing I had left to give her. And I left her the truth, even if you never could. Robert. I read it twice, then a third time. Each word landed like a stone in my chest. I wasn't supposed to read this, but somehow I think he knew I would. He knew she would never admit what she'd done. He knew she'd never tell me that she was the reason I didn't grow up with a father who cared, because the story of the abandoned single mother was more powerful, more sympathetic, and more useful than the story of a man failing, and trying again. And now it was mine to carry. All the time she called him a ghost, a deadbeat, a coward, and he'd been writing, trying, recording school schedules and saving scholarship applications. Why didn't he fight harder? Why didn't he show up anyway? I didn't know, and now I'd never get to ask. I curled up in the armchair again and cried for a father I hadn't been allowed to miss, for the child in me who'd needed protection and got manipulation, for the woman I was still becoming who had always been trying to earn love that was conditional and uneven. In the morning, the air felt heavier. I stood on the back porch, sipping cold coffee, staring at the lake. The world was moving around me, birds calling, wind stirring the trees, but something inside me had gone still. My phone buzzed again. Tessa, if I think you're being unfair, just because he didn't leave me anything doesn't mean I don't deserve some of it. I mean, I was there too. You're not the only one who lost someone. I didn't answer. Instead, I opened the app for my bank and checked my savings. I had just enough. I called a locksmith, changed the locks on the house, texted Tessa 2 hours later. The house isn't shared, it's mine. Dad left it to me and I'm keeping it that way. She replied instantly, Are you kidding after everything Mom did for you? I stared at the message for a long time, then typed, You mean after everything she told me she did? This time, no reply came. I spent the rest of the afternoon cleaning, room by room, not just to clear dust, but to reclaim space. I opened every cabinet, emptied drawers, found more letters, more scraps of a man I didn't know I'd lost. I kept them all. When I got to the closet in the master bedroom, something strange caught my eye. A floorboard was loose. I pried it up, and beneath it, wrapped in an old towel, was a small wooden box with brass corners. Inside, a USB drive, and a post-it note, Play me when you're ready to stop asking if you imagined it all. I brought it downstairs, plugged it into my laptop. A single file blinked back at me, legacy.mp4. I pressed play. The screen filled with static for a second. Then a man's face appeared. Older, weathered, my father. My real father. Not the ghost from my mother's stories. His voice was raspy, like he'd smoked too many cigarettes or spent too many years swallowing words. Evelyn, if you're watching this, then the house is yours. And I guess I'm not around anymore to tell you this in person. I know what your mother probably told you about me. I know what she made you believe, and I'm not here to make excuses. I just want you to know I tried. I failed too. A lot. But I never stopped loving you. Never. Even when you wouldn't write back. Even when you didn't know I was watching from a distance. I was always proud of you. This house, it's not just property. It's memory. It's evidence. And maybe, it's a way back to yourself. I hope you find peace here. I hope you find truth. And I hope one day you find someone who never makes you question what love should feel like. You deserved that. Always. Dad. When the video ended, I stared at the screen for a long time, and for the first time in my life, I let myself grieve. Not for his death, but for everything he never got the chance to be in my life. By the time the tears dried on my face, the afternoon light had faded into dusk, casting long shadows across the floor of the Lakehouse. I sat alone in the living room, the echo of his voice still lingering in the room like warmth from a fire that had gone out. For the first time in days, I felt still. Not at peace exactly, but steadier. Then my phone buzzed again. Tessa, Mom's really upset. Says you've been acting strange. That house shouldn't just be yours, you know. You're not the only one who has needs. I ignored it. Instead, I went downstairs again. This time, I was ready for the safe. My father's note. You won't open this today. Not because you can't, but because you're not ready. No longer felt like a wall. It felt like a door. One I finally had the strength to walk through. I knelt in front of the safe. I punched in the numbers I had found on the back of a photograph earlier that day my birthday reversed. The lock clicked. Inside were stacks of envelopes, legal documents, a slim binder labeled Final Instructions, and a single velvet pouch. I took it all upstairs and spread it across the kitchen table. Inside the pouch was a thumb-sized flash drive and a small handwritten note. This is not an inheritance. It's a responsibility. You can use it, or you can let it rot. But don't think it came without a price. I plugged the flash drive into my laptop. It contained a single folder, password protected. I paused, then tried something. Tessa. The folder opened instantly. My stomach turned. Inside were financial spreadsheets, wire transfer receipts, scanned legal filings, and a balance summary of over $2.4 million in a hidden offshore trust. And it was all under Tessa's name. But the signature on the documents, my father's. I stared frozen. He hadn't just been planning to leave everything to me. At some point, maybe for a long time, he'd been setting up Tessa for a financial future I knew nothing about. So why now? Why was the house left to me? I returned to the binder labeled Final Instructions. It read more like a journal. Pages filled with my father's handwriting, some angry, some resigned, some almost desperate. I thought if I gave Tessa the resources, she'd find her own way. But it only made her worse. She stopped answering calls, only contacted me when she needed more. Just like Margot. Evelyn never asked for a thing. She never even knew what I was doing. Maybe that was my mistake. But if you're reading this now, Evelyn, then I've changed the will. I've closed the trust. The money is here in the safe, but it's no longer in her name. It's yours. Do what you want with it. But don't give it back to the people who already decided you were just a resource. I stared at the page, my hands trembling. He'd taken money from Tessa and given it to me. I should have felt victorious, justified. But I didn't. I felt sick, because I knew exactly what would come next. The moment Tessa found out, she wouldn't be angry because she lost something she earned. She'd be furious because something she expected, no assumed, was now out of reach. And I wasn't ready for that fight. Not yet. Later that night, I sat on the dock behind the house, staring out at the black mirror of the lake. A million insects hummed in the trees. The stars above flickered like they were waiting for me to speak first. I thought about calling her, about telling her the truth, but I knew how that would go. She'd cry, then yell, then twist the narrative into something where she was the victim and I was the cold-hearted sister with a superiority complex. It had happened before, so many times I'd lost count. I'd lent her money when she needed to cover rent, only to see her on social media at a music festival a week later. I'd bailed her out of a DUI she swore was a misunderstanding. I'd taken her in when her third relationship fell apart in as many years, and she promised it was temporary. It was never temporary. And when I dared to set boundaries, she told Mom I was selfish, that I'd forgotten where I came from. But the truth was, I remembered exactly where I came from, and I was tired of paying for it. In the morning, I woke up to silence and the sound of my front door opening. I bolted upright, heart pounding. Footsteps, light, familiar. I grabbed the heavy flashlight from the kitchen drawer and crept toward the living room. Tessa, standing in the middle of the room like she belonged there, wearing my old college sweatshirt, her eyes swollen like she'd been crying or practicing how to look like she had. "Hey," she said softly. "Sorry I still had a key. I didn't move. You can't just walk in here. It's my house too." "No, it's not." She stared at me for a moment, then laughed bitterly. "Wow, he really got to you, didn't he? Left you some money and now you think you're the queen of this dump." I said nothing. Mom was right, she continued pacing slowly. "You always did think you were better than us, smarter, more deserving." "No," I said quietly. "I just stopped confusing guilt with love." That made her pause. She looked at me not with anger, but something closer to disbelief. Like I was no longer playing my part. Like she didn't recognize me anymore. "You changed," she said finally. I met her gaze. "No, I just stopped pretending." After Tessa left that morning, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, I sat alone in the living room for hours, staring at the space she'd just occupied. Her words echoed in my head, like a sour aftertaste I couldn't spit out. "He really got to you. You always did think you were better. This is our house too." It was like she couldn't imagine a version of me that didn't feel guilty, that didn't automatically fold under the weight of her disappointment. For years I'd been the fixer, the responsible one, the good daughter, and somehow in their eyes that made me selfish, arrogant, unfair. What they wanted wasn't partnership. They wanted tribute. I opened the safe again that afternoon, not for the money, but for something else. Proof. A sense of clarity. What I found instead made my stomach turn. Tucked in the back of the binder was a manila envelope labeled "Copies for Evelyn," in case of tampering. Inside were notarized forms confirming the transfer of funds from Tessa's offshore trust to my name, dated just 2 weeks before my father died. There was also a copy of the final will, stamped and filed with his lawyer. But most shocking was the email thread. Between my father and a name I didn't recognize, lrobinsonlegalprocure.net. At first I didn't understand, but as I read, the reality became horrifyingly clear. Tessa had tried to challenge the will before he even died. She'd contacted some shady paralegal firm, to explore options for future reassignment of estate assets. She had already anticipated he would leave something to me. She had already been planning to take it away. And Mom, her name appeared in the thread too. Subtly, softly, but present. She'd forwarded an old power of attorney form that had expired. Asked if intent mattered more than timeline. Called it just in case. I sat there shaking my heart, thudding against my ribs like it wanted out. They hadn't just stolen money. They had stolen my narrative. While I was grieving, trying to make sense of a father I'd barely known, they had been plotting, assuming, calculating. They expected me to share. No surrender. It wasn't about the money. It was about control. Rewriting history, so that I was still the provider. Still the emotional support beam they leaned on while they built the rest of the house on sand and excuses. That night, I called my father's attorney, Mr. Holgren. He was an old man with a dry, tired voice, but he remembered everything. "Yes, Ms. Hale," he said after I introduced myself. "Your father was quite specific. He believed you'd be the one to see it through. Said you had more grit than you gave yourself credit for. Did he ever mention Mom or Tessa trying to access anything?" There was a long pause. "I'm not legally allowed to share certain details," he said, "but let's just say you're not the first one to open that safe." I nearly dropped the phone. "You mean there was a break-in? The house wasn't damaged, but the safe was tampered with. Fortunately, your father anticipated this. The version of the will inside is not the original. That's still secure, but they tried. They failed." I hung up a few minutes later, my head spinning. They'd come here, without telling me, maybe even before I arrived, and they'd tried to erase what he left for me. Not just the property, but the truth. The next day I drove into town. stopped at the small courthouse, filed paperwork to solidify ownership, prevent any further legal challenges. The clerk looked up at me as I slid the forms across the desk. Family estate. Something like that, I said, just tying up loose ends. She nodded like she understood more than she said. Back at the Lakehouse, I boxed up the financial documents, storing them in a fireproof container. Then I did something I hadn't done since the day I arrived. I walked into the attic. It was musty, crowded with boxes and cobwebs. But tucked in one corner, beneath an old tarp, was a dusty leather-bound journal. I flipped it open. It was my father's, dated all the way back to the year I was born. He wrote about me, about watching me crawl, then walk, about taking me to the zoo and how I clapped when I saw flamingos, about how I called peanut butter peanutter, and then about the night he left. She told me I wasn't needed, that she could do better without me. And I believed her. Maybe because part of me thought she was right, but I never stopped loving that little girl in the flamingo hat. I just didn't know how to fight for her without making things worse. I closed the journal with shaking hands. The little girl in the flamingo hat had spent her life believing she wasn't worth fighting for. But now she knew the truth. And the people who had tried to twist it, they weren't villains. They were scared of what I might become if I finally saw myself clearly. Powerful, independent, whole. That evening I sat on the porch swing, watching the sun melt into the lake like gold poured into stillness. It should have been peaceful, but something inside me wouldn't settle. I kept replaying Tessa's visit, her words, her tone, the way she looked at me, like I was betraying her by simply enforcing a boundary. That had always been the game I give, they take. I question their guilt. I say no. They disappear, then reappear when they need something again. But now, I wasn't playing anymore. I wasn't angry. I was tired. Tired of wondering if every I love you came with a silent invoice. Tired of measuring my worth in how much I could sacrifice. And most of all, tired of giving trust to people who saw it as an open vault. My phone buzzed again. This time it was my mother. I let it go to voicemail. Then against my better judgment, I listened. Evelyn, I heard about what you're doing. Filing things. Locking people out. Your father may have left you that house, but don't think for a second it makes you better than us. He used money to control people. Just like you are now. That was it. No greeting, no affection. Just judgment disguised as concern. I set the phone down slowly. They hadn't taken the money. Not really. They'd taken something worse. They'd taken my trust. And that's so much harder to rebuild. The next morning I went back to the safe. I retrieved one last file I hadn't dared open before. It was thin, just a few pages, labeled Evelyn, last words unsent. It was a letter, typed with corrections in pen. I know you won't understand at first. Maybe not for years. But this is what I couldn't say when I was alive. I didn't fight harder because I thought you were safer without me. I let your mother control the narrative because I believed I was the villain she painted. I thought you'd hate me less if I just disappeared. But I watched you grow up from a distance and saw the cracks forming. I saw how much you gave, how much they took. I wanted to give you one thing: they could never manipulate the truth. You don't owe anyone your silence, Evelyn, or your inheritance, or your grief. You owe yourself a life that doesn't require you to bleed in order to be loved. I hope you build it. One brick of truth at a time. Dad. I folded the letter gently. Tears slid down my face, but this time they didn't sting. They healed. I finally understood. The money, the house, even the secrets, those were just the instruments. The real gift he'd left me was choice. The choice to end a legacy of manipulation and start one of my own. Later that day, I met with a lawyer. A different one, young, bright-eyed kind. I had her draw up paperwork that would prevent any part of the estate from being sold, borrowed against, or reassigned to anyone but me without my written consent. It wasn't revenge. It was a boundary. And boundaries, I was learning, are love directed inward. On my way home, I stopped at a local hardware store and bought a new mailbox. A red one, strong, bright. I replaced the old rusted one with a screwdriver and quiet resolve. The final screw clicked into place as the wind lifted across the lake. I turned back toward the house, my house, and let the weight of it all settle in my chest, not like a burden anymore, but like armor. I was done trying to fix the versions of myself they needed me to be. I was done auditioning for love. From now on, the only person I needed to prove anything to was me. I didn't realize how many things I'd excused until I started writing them down. That night, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook and pen, no screens, no distractions, just memories. I made 2 columns, what they said versus what actually happened. It was harder than I thought, because somewhere along the way, I had learned to question my memory before I questioned their behavior. Tessa said she only borrowed money once or twice. Reality, I'd sent her money 9 times in the last 3 years. Mom said she never stopped me from seeing my dad. Reality, she threw out every birthday card he ever mailed. Tessa said we've always had each other. Reality, I bailed her out while she ignored my calls for months. Each line I wrote felt like I was peeling away another layer of fog that had wrapped itself around my childhood and early adulthood. I'd lived in a story where I was the strong one, the reliable one. But I was never allowed to be hurt. I was never allowed to be angry. Because being angry meant I was ungrateful. That word ungrateful had been weaponized against me since I was a teenager. Every time I questioned my mother's choices, every time I told Tessa no, it was hurled at me like a branding iron. You think you're better than us. Don't forget who sacrificed for you. Some people would kill to have a sister like Tessa. You're lucky we even put up with you. No one said those things when I was handing over rent money or paying for car repairs. They only came out when I started asking questions. And suddenly it wasn't love, it was war. I closed the notebook and leaned back in my chair. I'd known deep down for years. But knowing isn't the same as accepting. Knowing is quiet, a whisper in your gut. Accepting is action. It's changing the locks, filing the paperwork, saying no and meaning it. Accepting meant choosing myself, not just in the legal sense, but emotionally, spiritually. Accepting meant walking away from the roles I was cast in and stepping into the truth of who I really was. A daughter who had been lied to, a sister who had been used, a woman who was done apologizing for surviving. The next morning, I walked down to the mailbox, the new red one gleaming in the morning sun, and found a single white envelope inside. No return address. My name scrawled across the front in handwriting I knew instantly. Tessa. I opened it slowly. Evelyn. You really went through with it. Locked us out. Changed everything. Guess Dad finally got what he wanted. I hope you enjoy your little kingdom. But don't pretend you're the good guy here. You think money makes you moral, it doesn't. It just gives you the luxury to pretend you're above it all. Mom's sick, by the way. Not that you asked. Good luck. Hope it was worth it. T. I folded the letter once neatly and placed it in a drawer. I didn't need to respond. Because it wasn't a letter, it was bait. It was designed to make me feel guilty, to pull me back into the cycle, the performance. But I wasn't an actress anymore. Later that afternoon, I stood in the master bedroom, staring at a photograph I hadn't noticed before me, and my dad sitting on the dock. I must have been 4 or 5. His arm was around me. I was laughing. It looked real. Not staged, not performative. Just real. I whispered to the photo, I'm figuring it out. I promise. Then I turned to the safe. There was one thing I hadn't done yet. The money, yes, I'd inventoried it, locked it up again. But I hadn't decided. What was I going to do with it? I could run, sell the house, start over. But that would make this just another transaction, another escape. No, this house, this truth was a foundation. So I made a plan, one account, one beneficiary, one purpose: restoration. Not revenge, not reward. Restoration of myself, my time, my peace, my future. The first wire transfer I made was to a trauma therapist. Not just for me, but for anyone in the community who needed one and couldn't afford it. The second, to a scholarship fund, one named after my father, anonymous, on the outside but sacred to me. The third, to myself, because for the first time I knew I didn't need to prove I was worthy of care. I already was. And that was the real inheritance. A week passed. Then another. The silence that followed that mediated meeting wasn't just absence, it was transformation. A pause that asked, now what? No phone calls from Tessa. No cryptic texts from my mother. No back-channel emails laced with manipulation. Just space. And in that space, something unexpected arrived. A letter, handwritten, from my mother. It was short, stiff. The ink wavered in places like she'd started over several times. Evelyn, I won't say you're right, but I will say I wasn't always honest. Not with you, not even with myself. I loved your father once, and I was furious when he stopped loving me back. I punished him by turning you against him, and I justified it as protection. You deserved better. From both of us. I don't expect forgiveness, but I hope you find some peace in that house, and maybe one day you'll come back home. Mom, I sat with it for hours, rereading it, trying to decide if it was real or another performance in the theater of guilt she knew so well. But then I realized something. It didn't matter. Whether she meant it didn't change the fact that I was no longer waiting for her to say it. The apology wasn't the point. The fact that I no longer needed it was. Later that evening, I got a call from Tessa. For once, I picked up. Her voice was quiet, different. I got a job, she said. Full-time, at a wellness center. Nothing fancy, but it's mine. That's good, I said, and meant it. Silence hung between us. I was angry because I thought you took something from me, she admitted. But the truth is, I'd been living off borrowed expectations for so long I didn't know what was mine anymore. I swallowed hard. You still have time to figure it out. I'm trying, she said. I don't know how, but I'm trying. That was the last time we spoke that month. No grand reconciliation, no promises, just truth, raw, unvarnished. And it was enough. Back at the Lakehouse, I stood barefoot on the dock one morning, the sky a riot of pink and gold. The lake was still mirroring the quiet inside me. I thought of my father, not as the man who left, not as the ghost they painted, but as the flawed, aching, generous human being he had revealed himself to be in the pages he left behind. I thought of the girl I had been desperate to belong to, be loved without having to earn it. And I thought of the woman I was now rooted, awake, sovereign. This wasn't just about money or property or inheritance. It was about choosing to live outside the story that others wrote for me. It was about becoming the author. That evening, I opened a bottle of wine I'd been saving since college graduation, one I never had occasion to drink. I sat on the back porch, journal in hand, and wrote down 3 things. I am not responsible for their choices. I am allowed to protect my peace. I am no longer surviving, I'm living. Then I closed the journal, raised the glass to the sky, and whispered, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to the moment, to the quiet, to the girl who made it this far. I didn't realize how much I'd changed until I ran into someone who still saw me as the person I used to be. It happened at the farmer's market of all places. I was picking out tomatoes when I heard a voice behind me say, "Evelyn, is that you?" I turned and saw Claire Mallory, my childhood neighbor, my mother's closest friend for years. She was still wearing that same shade of coral lipstick, still clutching her oversized purse like it held state secrets. "My goodness," she said, appraising me with a tilt of her head. "You look different. Thinner maybe, happier." I smiled politely. "It's been a long year." "Your mother said you've been holed up in that lake house like a recluse," she said, laughing lightly. I told her, that girl always was a little serious. That girl. I smiled again, but it didn't reach my eyes. "I'm not that girl anymore," I said gently. Claire blinked. "Well, I suppose none of us are." But that wasn't true. Some people stayed exactly who they were because it was easier than confronting change. I'd just spent the last few months burning old narratives to the ground, and from the ashes, something entirely new was growing. When I got home, I walked through the lake house slowly. It didn't feel like a stranger's space anymore. It felt lived in, held, honest. I had repainted the walls soft sage in the living room, creamy white in the kitchen. I'd replaced the old curtains with ones I'd sewn myself. The photo of me and my father on the dock now hung in the entryway. I was still alone, but I wasn't lonely. That distinction used to terrify me. Now it anchored me. On a whim, I opened the box of old mail again. Among the yellowing bills and outdated catalogues, I found a small envelope with no return address postmarked 3 years earlier. Inside was a single photograph. My father, sitting in a cafe, reading. Behind him, blurred in the background, was me. I didn't remember that moment, but he had seen me, documented me. Even from afar, he had been watching. It wasn't obsession. It was longing. Love unspoken, and perhaps regret. I slid the photo into the frame next to our dock picture. It belonged there, not as proof of anything, but as a reminder. People are rarely just one version of themselves. We are stories, shifting, folding, unraveling, rewriting, and I had rewritten mine. That weekend, I hosted my first dinner at the Lakehouse. Just a few close friends. Haley from work, Daniel and his partner from the hiking group. People who knew me not as someone's daughter or sister, but as Evelyn as me. I made lemon chicken and roasted carrots. There was laughter, candles, soft music. Someone asked, "So what's next for you?" I didn't hesitate. "I'm starting something," I said. "I don't know exactly what it is yet, but it's mine. Maybe a retreat center for women. Maybe just a quiet place for people like me who've had to begin again." Haley smiled. "That sounds like exactly what the world needs." I smiled too, but deeper than that, I felt it. Not the approval, the alignment. For once, I wasn't performing. I was showing up as I was. No guilt, no armor, just me. It rained the morning I made peace with everything. Not the angry, punishing kind of rain, but a soft, steady curtain of water that tapped gently on the windows and soaked the lake in silver. I sat at the writing desk in the corner of the upstairs room, the one that used to smell like mothballs and loss. Now it smelled like lavender and wood polish. The photo of my father and me sat beside a new one, just me. Alone on the dock, hair blown by the wind, a quiet smile on my face. Haley had taken it on her last visit. I pulled out my notebook and opened to a fresh page. "The end is where I begin." I wrote those words at the top without really knowing what would follow. Then I started, not with the day he died, not with the key in the envelope, but with a moment much smaller and more intimate. The day I first questioned the narrative, the moment I realized love wasn't supposed to feel like obligation. That grief didn't have to mean guilt. That trust once broken could be rebuilt, but only with care, not demand. I wrote for hours, about the secrets, the safe, the letters, the betrayals, but also the awakening, the clearing out, the becoming. At some point I realized I wasn't just telling my story. I was offering it to women like me, women raised to carry everything quietly, to be the peacekeepers, the givers, the forgivers, women taught to stay soft even when the world was hard. I wrote the last line of the journal just as the rain stopped. You don't have to earn rest, you just have to choose it. That afternoon I walked down to the dock barefoot, the boards slick and cool beneath my feet. The lake was calm again, the sky pale blue and stretching wide. I stood at the edge and whispered, "I'm still here." And I was, still here, still standing, not untouched but unbroken. A month later, I launched something small but powerful, the key project. A foundation, a retreat, a space for women who needed to start over but didn't know how. Not therapy, not charity, just witnessing. We offered weekend workshops, journaling nights, legal advice for financial independence, housing support for women leaving controlling families. The first woman who arrived was older than I expected, 62 grey curls and tired eyes. She'd given up everything for her children, and they'd left her in a nursing home with no warning. She didn't want pity. She wanted someone to say, "You still matter." So I said it, over coffee, over breakfast, over shared stories on the porch swing overlooking the lake. She cried, then she wrote, then she danced. She left with her shoulders a little straighter, and I realized this was what the house was always meant to become, not a shrine to pain, but a threshold to power. One morning, months later, I found a package at the doorstep. Inside, a small wooden flamingo. No note, no name, but I knew. Tessa. Maybe she wasn't ready to speak yet. Maybe she never would be. But she'd remembered something, and for now that was enough. I placed the flamingo on the bookshelf between two journals. Then I brewed a fresh cup of coffee, stepped outside onto the porch, and watched the sun climb up through the trees. My story had started with a lie, but it ended with a choice, a house, a key, a woman who finally understood that the truth didn't have to scream to be powerful. Sometimes it just needed to be claimed, and I had claimed it. Every last word,